Today's question: do you ever feel like God has forgotten about you? You can be sure that He has not. In Genesis 16, we read about Abraham and Sarah, Hagar and Ishmael. Perhaps you're familiar with the story's plot. Abraham was a very old man. Sarah, his wife, could not have children, and she also now was very old. But God had promised that a great nation would come from Abraham. So Abraham and Sarah waited, and waited, and waited, but still no son. So Sarah took things into her own hands. She gave her servant Hagar to Abraham so that Hagar could have a child for Sarah. Hagar would be similar to what we would call a surrogate mother. Sure enough, Hagar conceived. And sure enough, just as we would expect, the jealousy and hatred between the two women began. So Sarah dealt harshly with Hagar, her servant. Then she sent her packing. It appears that Hagar decided to return to her homeland of Egypt. But on the way, the Lord met her at a water spring. What was His message to her? First, He questioned her, showing His genuine concern for her situation. Where have you come from, and where are you going? But He also addressed her as Sarah's servant. Yes, God saw Hagar's situation, and He called it exactly what it was. He understood the desperate condition she was in. God then told Hagar to return to Sarah and to submit herself to Sarah's authority. But He also made her a promise. She would give birth to a son, and God would multiply her descendants exceedingly through him. Imagine Hagar's surprise and delight when she realized that the God of her master and mistress was also concerned about her, a slave who was far from home. Hagar believed God, and she called Him by a name that spoke very personally to her situation. You are the God who sees. Similarly, the water spring there was called Bir Lahai Roi, the well of Him who lives and sees, or to the living as sight. Hagar did what God commanded. She returned to Sarah and submitted to her, and soon Hagar gave birth to a son. She named him Ishmael, for this is the name which the Lord Himself had told her to give him. And what does Ishmael mean? God shall hear. Putting these names together then, we see that God sees and God hears. Each of these names is significant. The God who sees, the well of Him who lives and sees. God shall hear. Hagar was a servant. Hagar had been used as a means to an end. Hagar had no covenant claim to the God of Abraham, for she was an Egyptian. Yet still, God saw Hagar. He had a clear divine understanding of her situation. And God, by naming Ishmael God shall hear, was promising Hagar that He would hear their pleas to Him. God did not leave Hagar to fend for herself. He saw her plight, her need. He understood her fear and shame, and He came to her in compassion, in love, and with the goal of drawing her and her son into a real and living relationship with Himself. Ishmael was not the son of promise. That son would be born to Abraham through Sarah, just as God had declared. So Christ the deliverer would not descend from Ishmael's line. But Christ the deliverer was still for Ishmael's line, for him and all his descendants. Christ's salvation would come through Isaac, yes, but this salvation was always intended for the whole world, for the people of every nation. Today, as we consider the heart-rending, ongoing conflict between the seed of Ishmael and the seed of Isaac, a conflict that now dates back almost 4,000 years, we can still be confident that God sees, and God shall hear. Yes, Israel is God's chosen people, and God loves them dearly. But God has also made it very clear that He also dearly loves Ishmael and his descendants. What is the key to knowing this love personally, just as God was inviting Hagar to do? Some people say, when I see, then I will believe. But God's way is this: when you believe, then you will see. Hagar believed that this was the one true God who had been talking to her. Hagar realized that God was reaching out to her personally and that this holy God was inviting her into a personal relationship. By listening to God and choosing to take him at his word, which she proved by returning to Sarah and submitting to her, Hagar saw God's physical promises to her and her son fulfilled. And so for us today, God is still the God who sees, and still God shall hear. He knows your unique situation. He looks on you with tender compassion and love. His eye is upon you, and his ear is just waiting for your earnest prayer to him. He says, whoever believes on him will not be put to shame, and whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved.